Welcome to the Growing with Purpose podcast. I'm Paul Spiegelman, and we're going behind the scenes with very special leaders, learning about what shaped them into who they are in business and in life. My guest today is Kevin Schnieders. Kevin is the CEO and president of EDSI, a workforce development, customized training, and consulting company. Kevin started as a training consultant back in 1994 and today refers to his role as the chief servant leader, overseeing a company that has quadrupled in revenue and has over 800 employees. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Good to be with you.
Great to have you. Well, as usual with our audience, I want to just set the stage by understanding what is EDSI, what do you guys do, and what does workforce development really mean?
Yeah, thanks. Someone told me, Paul, if you can't describe what your company does to hold the interest of a 13-year-old, then you're doing it incorrectly. And I was listening to you talk a little bit about the company and watching for my own eyes to glaze over. So, yeah, in all those descriptions, we really see ourselves putting people in front of a better mirror. So we get a chance to do customized training. And in that work, we work with a lot of people who are economically disadvantaged. So we run very large programs for the government and 10 states and major cities, all the way from Missouri up to Manhattan and down to Florida. And as we do that work, we're taking people who are out of work and finding work for them. We get about 4 to 6 weeks to work with them in those programs. So really rapid transition for people who are economically disadvantaged. And we also do the traditional work that our company was founded in 1979 on, which is customized training for businesses that are looking to just do that better, smarter, faster.
So to make sure, as a 13-year-old now that I understand, um, when your primary client in most cases is going to be the government, and they have an audience of workers who are disadvantaged. So explain what that means, and then they're hiring you to place them in permanent roles in various companies.
That's exactly right. Yeah, thanks, Paul. So these are folks that are on food stamps or their food stamps just ran out. They're transitioning off of temporary assistance. They were recently laid off in a big closure of a plant or something. They're people who are late on their child support payments and are going to be incarcerated if they don't work and make consistent payments. All kinds of different groups that we would be recruiting from and come to see us. But all the funding comes initially through the federal government, down through in a block grant to the state, and then all of our customers are either counties or cities. That's how we prefer to do that work. And yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, I started. You mentioned more than 800 people. There were eight. When I started here, 900 almost, and so it's been quite an education over the last 30 years for me personally, and love the work that I get to do.
What a great run as well. And I want to hear more about the story, but I want to hear about this title, Chief Servant Leader, and how that fits in and makes a difference in the kind of business that you're operating.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have a friend of mine who was in a leadership master's program, and he was at the time serving as the assistant principal to the high school that we both attended, Dearborn Divine Child, here in Michigan. And so he asked me to come back to speak to the students. And after I got off of the stage, went up there and he told the students, he said, Kevin's one of the few people I know that lives the values that he talks about. He actually walks this walk. And he got down then and was talking to me afterwards, Paul. And I said, Damien, that was a huge, huge compliment. Thank you. What a gift. And he said, relax, it's just a pretty simple servant leadership model. And so I had
Mm.
not at this point heard about servant leadership. And what I loved about it, Paul, is that he was saying to me that this is authentically how you are living as a leader. And it's called servant leadership. And so I began to dive into it. He gave me my first book by a local author here, Hunter, and it's called Servant Leadership. And so I just started to pay attention to it, and that's 20 years ago now. At the time, there weren't many people talking about it, and I was in a graduate program myself, and one of my colleagues in graduate school said, "Hey, if you call yourself the chief servant leader, why don't you tell everybody that?" And out of respect for Stanley, I came home the next weekend and I asked Jennifer, my assistant, to put it on my business cards. So that was
Mm.
probably north of 15 years ago now, Paul, that I've been using that as my official title. And it just reinforces for everybody that that's what we're about here at EDSI, that we're doing servant leadership. And I have an acronym that I use to explain it to people in about a minute or less, but it's been a vocation for me for more than 20 years now.
So I think you were kind of an early adopter where now servant leadership is kind of a term of art. Everybody says it, may not do it, but they all talk about it. I've known you for a number of years, Kevin, and I've listened to some incredible examples of that, how that is lived out on a day-to-day basis. Can you share a couple of examples, particularly how that shows up for you as a leader in the company?
Yeah, so it's an interesting process too. Thanks, Paul, for saying that. And you know, you go from a company the size of 9 people in the same room, three of whom are related to you when you start in 1994, to then there's, nearly 900 all across the country. And what was challenging for me is to make sure that we maintained this authenticity that I love people. And so I got into business almost accidentally, but I love people. And so my connections were always in that way. And so we as servant leaders meet the needs of the people that report to us in the simplest way to describe it. And so in meeting those needs, I need to be connected to them. And as we grew to about 400 people, I wasn't feeling connected anymore to who they were and what their stories were and how I could help them. And so I needed to figure that out. And I sat down with Jennifer, who's been my assistant for 19 years. And I said, Jen, this is what I'm feeling, and this is the idea that I have, right? I want to meet with people across the company. And at that time, we were traveling. I was traveling to do that. And she said, well, how would you do that with 400 people? And I said, well, we can do it in groups of 10 or less. And, at that time, I don't even know if I knew initially, Paul, but I said, I'm not going to let them talk about work. I just want to connect with them as a human being. And so that's, grew and we've been doing that for over 8 years now. Jennifer and I have, and at least, I don't remember, maybe 10 years. But what's so cool about the process, Paul, is that, again, I'm trying to meet their needs. We're not talking about it during the half hour that I have with these 10 people about what the business needs are. But what it's
Mhm.
saying to them is authentically who I am. I care more about them, the person, than I do the employee. So I want to connect with them. And then at the end of the meeting, I will say something like, hey, could you all get together now in the room and just tell me one dumb thing that I'm doing as a leader or one dumb thing that EDSI is doing that we need to do differently? And so we, collect dozens of dumb things that I'm doing, and we really authentically then want to change those and step up to that responsibility. Now that they've told us we have to change that, we have to make the company better. So you get to crowdsource things about the business at the very end. But yeah, Jennifer also stays into all these meetings and she takes better notes than I do. So today I reached out to 6 people that I had met with in a town hall in the last 6 months, and they were going on a cruise and just returning, or they had a grandbaby that was just born, or one of the kids is starting indoor soccer and was just getting out of his outdoor season. And so I was emailing them this morning to say, hey, how is the season going for your son, Caden? What's going on? How was the cruise? And I get these amazing emails back, and it helps me stay connected with 900 people. I'm sorry for the long story, Paul, but I also met with Angeline this afternoon, and Angela Nunez, who's a great employee of ours out on the East Coast, I had a one-to-one with her just to say thank you and say, you're making the company great. I'm taking a half an hour to get to know you a little bit better and make sure you know that whatever you need, I'm here for you and you can always reach out to me. So you can imagine the multiplier that has across the organization when you're showing them that you really do care. I went from getting no unsolicited emails from employees to starting to do this process to I get 10 to 12 a day from people that are either having a great experience or they're having a tough experience, and I can quickly connect them to the help that they need.
Yeah, it's just an amazing practice, and I've always envied that. And the key that you've been able to accomplish is that you've scaled it as the company grows, and you stay committed to it. And I know the employees see that commitment. Do you actually have time to do anything else in your role, or is that your primary job? And that's okay. And then that also begs the question that you must have a very strong leadership team that's executing on the actual job of running the day-to-day business.
Yeah, phenomenal leadership team. Just taking those questions in reverse order, Paul. Our leadership team of 10 of us today has been with us from Arlene Jones, our Chief Talent Officer, has worked with me for 29 years. And the lowest in tenure is 16 years. That's the newbie in the room, Casey, our
Mm.
chief our marketing director. And so it's what a joy for a person that loves people to get the gift of working with people for 29 years. In Arlene's example, Ro is 25, Colleen's 24. I mean, it's amazing to be able to work with people that, real quickly when the pandemic started and I started doing more Zoom calls, my wife, was a really talented social worker, just retired a couple of years ago. She's walking by the room, and I would hang up our business calls, and I would say, "Okay, I love you," and they'd say, "Love you too." And she's like, "Who are you talking to?" I'm like, "Oh, it's Colleen." And she's like, she had never seen me work before, and she didn't know that we end almost all of our calls by telling the other person how much we care about them. And so that's very comfortable to us within EDSI's world, but it's very different. To your point, do I do anything else? I will tell you that I spend the majority of my time with people, helping people around the culture of the company and their experience. But you have a responsibility as the chief elected official and still the CEO in the company to do that work well. That can only be done, to your point, Paul, because of the quality of the leaders within the company. And Jennifer truly is, Jen Sarkeesian, my executive assistant, is the most effective person I've ever worked with in terms of the combination of speed and accuracy, and speed and quality is unlike anything that you could see and imagine. So Jen and I say, look, you'd be successful without me, and I'd be successful without you, but we act as each other's amplifiers. We're essentially plugging a guitar into an amplifier, and she allows me to lead the way that I want to lead and make it super effective.
Think that the lesson for our listeners is you're playing the ultimate role of a leader, which is I used to say in my company that we exist to enhance the lives of the people that work here. And if I can build a leadership team that's executing, that's functioning well, if I'm not responsible for the day to day because I built such a great team, I get to do what I hope that I do best, which is to be a steward of the culture and to spend time with people and show them that you care and ask those questions, listen to those ideas, implement those ideas. And that's just going to multiply. And that's how you build a great company. And you've known that for many years, and you continue to be consistent with that. And the cycle simply continues. But I want to take you back, Kevin, to even your childhood and where some of these sensibilities may have come from. Because I know you started as a consultant at EDSI. You didn't start out, running the whole company. I don't know if entrepreneurship was part of your blood or not, but where did this all come from?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And thanks for the compliment too. It means so much to me coming from you. My dad was an entrepreneur, and so he was a school administrator until he just got sick of the school board, essentially, and went to my mom when I was 7 years old and said, "Hey, I got to do something else." And she said, "That's great. You got an 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So figure out how we're going to get benefits and a pension now that you don't want to work for the schools anymore." And so he started the company in a steel desk in the basement, which I still am in awe of his courage. If he were still with us, I'd tell him this afternoon. But
Mm.
uh, I got a chance to spend 40,000 hours almost with my dad as an adult, and very few people get that opportunity. And we had a really great experience, which is not common too in a lot of family businesses. So beyond fortunate in so many ways. I was not the kid, Paul, that was like really jonesing to have a paper route and stuff like that. My dad and I figured out pretty early on with my paper route that I was not collecting from the families that I didn't think could afford to pay, or that had, like a bad situation at home, because these were my neighbors. So I didn't collect from them. So I had trouble paying my bills, right? So these were my early business lessons. And my dad was at the kitchen table and he was writing another check for my monthly bill because I couldn't afford to pay it. And he said, I don't understand. If you would just collect from all these people, I wouldn't have to be writing a check for right now. And I said, hey, if you would have let me quit the paper route when I wanted, you wouldn't be writing a check right now either. So it was not in my blood to start a lemonade stand or anything like that. I grew up watching my dad and really admiring what entrepreneurism was, but we were doing highly technical training, customized training on a new piece of equipment in manufacturing. And that, as my dad would say if he were with us, Paul, like you are your mother's son. I joke that he told me I was my mother's son so often I started looking sideways at the mailman. But they were married, happily married for 55 years, and my dad and I worked together real happily for 13 years because I am my mother's son. And so my personality was much more of hers, of a real intuitive sense for who people were and how they could be successful and what their strengths are, a selflessness that my mother possesses, that it never needed to be about her. And so I got to work with my dad, and all of this is by accident, right? We didn't plan any of this. I actually wanted to be a sportscaster because that was what I was interested in, and I wanted to talk about it all the time. And my dad said, "Congratulations, you've picked the one career that I can't help you with at all." When I was a freshman in college, and so I started as an intern at WXYZ here in Detroit, and was an intern for 2 years. Dave Llewellyn, a longtime sportscaster and broadcaster, is still one of my closest friends. He was my first boss at 19 years old, doing that in sportscasting. And so, I went from that to working there full time as a producer after college. And my parents were awesome, Paul. They said, "Hey, you'll be a great sportscaster, but just in case, why don't you get a certificate to teach high school education?" And I fell in love with it. I mean, I was an English teacher and a speech teacher, and I loved it. I really did. And so I probably could have had a really happy career for 30 years as an educator. But when I came out of college and I had a job offer to teach high school English, I told the principal, I said, "I really have to pursue this television thing." And I did that for a year. And then just almost by accident, my dad got a contract in Pittsburgh to work with 50 dislocated steelworkers, and he wasn't going to take it. And I talked him into doing it. I was feeling bullish about my curriculum skills, so I said, "Let me help you with the workbooks." And I never left. I went to drop those workbooks off in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I sat with Albert and a couple other participants for a couple days in those classes. And I drove back home and I went into my dad's office and I said, "This is what I want to do." And he looked at me and he said, "I know." He said, "Because you love people." And I said, "I thought I loved sports, but I love people." And he said, "No." And we know, your mom and I know, and it doesn't surprise me you want to be involved in this work to help people who are having a hard time at the moment. And he said, "Let me teach you how to build it as a business." And we did that. And we had about 200 employees. We were doing about 16 million in revenue, and 150 employees, something like that, Paul, at the time. And he came to me over lunch and he said, "Hey, it's time for me to leave. You are your mother's son. You love people and you have patience for people. And I never wanted a company with 200 people. So we'll figure out the deal structure." And you got a year with me to figure that out. And I bought it over 13 years, starting in 2007.
Wow. Now, do you have family that are still in the business?
No, older brother, younger sister. Neither one are. My brother is a super talented, working within education. He's the chief learning officer, essentially, at Fairfield University out in Connecticut. And my sister is a social worker and has a nice practice of family social work. So they're both super talented, really successful people. You'll laugh at this, Paul, because I know family business is close and near and dear to your heart.
Mm.
My brother and I took a turn, working at EDSI. He was older, so he had to work 40 hours a week. And then I came along and my mom was like, "That was dumb. Kevin only has to work 20 hours a week." And then my sister came along and they said, "Hey, she doesn't have to do anything." So in that way,
Mhm.
when we signed the paperwork to buy the company, right, my parents were concerned because most of their, assets were tied up in the company. And so when we signed the paperwork to do the deal, my brother called me the day after I signed the paperwork, and he said, "I want to check for my shares." We all had been gifted 6 shares by my dad when he started the company. And I said, "Hey, thanks for the shareholder confidence. I haven't been even doing this for 24 hours yet." And he said, "No, it's not that." He said, "I'm sure you'll do great things with the company. I just know what the value is today, and I don't want to wait around for another valuation." And I'm like, "Okay, great." So I wrote him a check, and I'm like, that felt pretty good. And I wrote my sister a check. And just for anyone involved in family business, right? I think that it's either the greatest thing in the world or the most challenging thing in the world. They're either rocket ships that are amazing companies, or there's companies that are struggling. I don't know any average family companies. And so it's just really nice not to have some complication with it now as 100% owner. And I say that with great love and admiration for both my brother and sister.
I think it's both of those extremes at the same time. And right, that's what I experienced in my family business. So I see exactly where you're coming from. I'm thinking about the moment that you had that conversation with your dad. Of course, you'd been there for a year. He said it was time. Maybe you anticipated that. But for someone that wasn't really a born entrepreneur and focused on the people side, what was that transition like for you? Was there fear uh, and trepidation about, wow, more than just being a compassionate guy who focuses on people? Now I own this thing and the responsibility that comes along with that.
Yeah, certainly in 2007 when I signed the paperwork, there was Paul, and for anybody that's done that, started a company, had that responsibility of payroll, ultimate admiration that I have for you, and all those people, because it takes a certain amount of courage to say that you want to do that. When I did it, at least, I knew that I was a really good chief operating officer. My dad and I had been working in that structure for about 5 years and had a lot of confidence in doing that work. And operations was really what I grew into over the years and loved. And so that I knew, right? But I went home and I told my wife after I signed the paperwork with my mom and dad, I said, I have no idea if I'm going to be any good at this at all. And like any caring partner, she said, how can I help you? And I said, just be my North Star, right? I don't want to
Mm,
screw up anything at home. We had a 6 month old baby, and Lauren had just been born. And I said, you're my best friend. And Lauren's 6 months old. So I said, I can always sell the company, but I don't want to mess anything up here. So our daughter was born on the 8th of the month. And on the 8th day of every month, even 18 years later, I go to my wife and say, can I go back to work tomorrow on the
mm,
9th? And she said, yeah, go ahead. You're doing great. Right. And so I've always placed as a 1 and 1A my role as a husband and father before my role as an entrepreneur. That's 1A. I care deeply about it, but it is what I do. It's not who I am, and I deeply identify with who I am as Lauren and Riley's dad and Wendy's partner. So for me, that's really been helpful, Paul, to just keep my own priorities in order in terms of what is important to me. And 18 years later, she's still sending me back to work, so it must be okay on some level.
mhm. Yeah, the contract gets renewed every year. I love it. Um, so I'm thinking about your customers or the business that you're in, and my business was a call center business, right? Nothing sexy about it. Commodity business, known for competing based on price. And yet we were able to translate the culture we created into being a, very profitable business that stood out from our competition. If I'm thinking about the core business that you're in, which is as a placement company, albeit for disadvantaged people, all supporting government agencies. How does that culture that you create translate to the customer and make a difference in the marketplace? And I presume you have competitors.
Yeah, for sure. And you did it better than anyone I know, Paul. So congratulations to you. Really, I say that sincerely as someone I really admire. As we try to do that and try to replicate the culture, they definitely see that. The customers, the people who are funding our work, absolutely see that difference. They will say things to you in passing of, like I can always tell an EDSI person. They appreciate it when we take on a new contract. I always say, look, this is going to go well. Of course it will. And then it won't at certain times, right? The tide will go out at some point. That's when you're going to be glad that you're working with EDSI. When you see what we're willing to do, despite costs, to make things right, to do things the right way, you're going to be glad that you have a partner with EDSI. We still work with the city of Pittsburgh and the county of Allegheny that Pittsburgh sits in 30 years later. So that
Mm,
initial contract is still operating 30 years later. And we don't exit a lot of communities that we enter because of what the customers feel as is a really strong relationship with people who are willing to do the right thing and show up for them, right? And I think when you mention culture, Paul, I mean, our values are show up, smile, and support. And when I wrote those when I bought the company, people laughed at me. And I'm not talking about people outside of EDSI. I'm talking about our core leadership team laughed at me. They couldn't imagine values that were stated as show up, smile, and support. And that's been the most powerful thing I think in leadership that I've been able to help with. And a year later, very conscientious leader, Jim Ellis, who was running one of our programs, said to me, and he's still with us today, 18 years later. But Jim said, I don't know what smile means, right? Like we have been operating these values for a year. And me being as surely as intelligent as I am would have described those words to people. But Jim's like, I don't know what you're talking about with smile. And I wasn't referring to my cheesy grin, right? I was talking about these what we now call the daily ways. And so I borrowed what I had learned from the Ritz-Carlton and their basics and replicated them in the daily ways and told people what those words were. So every Monday morning, there's a video that goes out talking about one of the daily ways. I did one of them this morning, and that goes out to 900 people to say, hey, here's what our values are. And so when you get that cadence going, and the values are simply stated and people can live them, or they're in a tough spot and the customer wants something, to your question, Paul, and hey, we got to show up, right? We have to support them, and we're going to do that in a positive way that moves things forward. That's powerful stuff that we've been fortunate enough to stumble upon.
And doing it for all these years, it's not as easy as it sounds. It's not as perfect as it sounds. You're getting emails every day from these employees who you've opened up the channels for. You're talking to them daily and you're having these conversations. What kind of challenges on a day-to-day basis are you facing?
Yeah, the ones that hit me the hardest, Paul, are the HR ones, our internal people when they're having a different experience, or when you set that bar so high, the expectation is so high from the culture and the things that they're seeing me say in videos. It's not going to be perfect, right? And they're going to stumble and we're going to stumble in our leadership. And so when those things come up and it really gets contentious, that's what I feel the most. Or when there's a customer that is not getting the performance that they need. And that's happening today in 5% of our offices, right? And so you could go to sleep tonight knowing that you're getting it right 95% of the time, and it's just not good enough. I think those are the challenges that sometimes you feel when you're letting people down, right? So I definitely see that through my lens of that individual. Our mission statement says that we will see through other people's eyes, and I think that resonates with EDSI and certainly with me as a leader because I never look through my own eyes. It's if you were to say to me, Paul, what's a perfect day when you have no responsibilities? I just put it on mute and sit here for a while. It's I'm always in service to other people, and I don't say that for any other reason. And that's what brings me true joy. And so, if the person that you're trying to serve is not feeling it, and even feeling the exact opposite of it, of your intentional behavior, I really do struggle with that still to this day, so many years later.
Yeah, it's just about listening. Now, how about I'm sure just even in these last few years, with everything that's been going on, there's been some humbling decisions that you've had to make as a leader. Can you give an example?
Yeah, we got really lucky, pandemically speaking, in that our funding continued, right? And until it didn't. My dad and I would always talk about how government funding follows the regular economy by 18 months. So you do have a heads up, but you know that the bill's coming due
Mm,
at some point because the funding.
mm,
So we were able to keep everybody in their jobs. I think the tougher decisions when you ask that question, Paul, are really for me around how you grow, right? And so those people who are committed to the work that is great work for every customer, you got to be careful in terms of the pace of the growth. And I think we have tried to moderate that at a point where it's like last year we grew at top line at 4% and bottom line at 17%. That's a really great year from my
yeah,
perspective. And so, I love that kind of growth, but those are the decisions that I think are most challenging. I also think, we carry a very large line of credit, because we have to wait to get paid sometimes in the core business that we operate. And so that's hard with interest rates. That changes the dynamic. And all of a sudden you have to say, okay, we've got $1 million that's going out the door in interest payments that we didn't used to pay. And so where's that going to come from? Because we're not going to cut our way to success. So how do we do that in the near term? How do we do that in the long term? Putting people first and profits second, sure. But really, what's the long-term sustainability of that and that model? So yeah, there's lots of great challenges that test your creative ability. But when you get to do that with people that you love, it doesn't matter, right? I always tell them I'll open a car wash tomorrow with all of you, but I don't know what I would do without you.
Well, car washes can be very profitable, Kevin.
Maybe
So
I maybe I should.
I hear it's a great business. Um, Actually, I where I grew up in the LA area, there's a car wash that's been run by a family for so many years and still around to this day. And when I'm back in California, I make sure I stop by. Yeah, that could be a fallback for you. With all that you're doing, I know you're continuing to learn. So what is a an area of leadership that you feel like you still need to improve on?
Yeah, I can see it come up. I tell our daughters, Paul, that like the tide will come in, the tide will go out, and hopefully you feel like you still have this big, beautiful ocean for you. I got that from an author, Dr. Shafali Sabari. But as I use that with them, it's the same in business for me, right? It's like, yeah, the tide's going to come in, the tide, it almost feels like it's on a rhythm, like the tide, right? Where you're just like, you can't do anything but win. And then all of a sudden you can't win. And you're like, wait, I'm still doing the same things. I think I'm trying to learn um, constantly, right? You've been patient enough to listen. I'm a lot of things. I'm not succinct, right? So the art of the question has been something I've been in constant pursuit of for 18 years. How can I listen better? How can I ask better questions? That's my only effort as a servant leader and as a human. And unfortunately, I was born, with the gift of gab. So it's been a real transformational thing over my 52 years and really getting to that place where it's like I know I'm doing good work when I do very little talking, but just keep the conversation going with intelligent, thoughtful questions. And that's also when I'm at my happiest. I think when things get stressful for me, I've learned and am trying to learn what those tells are, how much I'm talking, how quickly I'm talking. Those are just little signs in those ways that can be helpful. And I'm also trying to learn from people that, maybe are more successful from a profit standpoint or have better margins. And so I am constantly curious if the latest thing that I pursued outside of work, Paul, was, being an empty nester almost, or having your
Mm,
oldest go away to college. And
yeah.
so I always do the same thing, right? I talk to 10 to 12 people that have gone through it, and I take them to breakfast or lunch and I ask questions and listen and try to pick up wisdom. And then I read, and just pour myself into as much research as I can. And then I try to use my gut. But those are really the three legs of the learning stool for me, is to try to invest in people's experience, invest in the wisdom that can come through the books and the research, and then make a good decision, with Wendy in that example. But it's been great to be able to do that in different ways, and I certainly do that professionally through different resources too.
Well, it sounds like you have a wonderful process, professionally and personally, to work through all of those. So, kind of final question, Kevin. And you came up through the ranks, and you've been through this family business that's continuing to grow, and you're making a huge impact on the workforce in so many different ways that I know has got to be very fulfilling. Uh, what advice would you give to a younger person that's just starting out in business?
Yeah, find a great mentor for sure. I mean, how fortunate was I to have the original one with my dad, right? Who had me making, $20,500 when I started and reporting to someone else. And when we did the valuation, Paul, the guy looks at my dad and he goes, he's the chief operating officer for like a $16 million, $15 million company, whatever it was. And my dad goes, yeah. And he goes, you can't replace him for what you're paying him, right? So what was so great about that story, my dad he wasn't intentionally underpaying me. He wasn't just doing a lot of outside the company research on what I should be paid. And so in
Mhm.
that way, he never exposed me to all the things that kids might be exposed to growing up in a company, right? Where a family might be fortunate enough to have some more money. I got exposed to all that other stuff. So that's huge, right? Put yourself in a position, whether it's a family company or not, where you're experiencing everything and going through what everybody else is going through, right? Whether you're related to the owner or not. That was my dad's wisdom for sure. And then I had, a guy named Larry Short, who was a mentor for 15 years as a Vistage chair. Larry was just a prince of a human being and a great guy to me. And so that helps a lot. And then just really ask great questions, right? Go out there and find other people that have done it before and ask them great questions. And there are no silver bullets, but if you talk to enough people, you can just you can make your own recipe, right? You can pull enough out of it that as you're learning, you can put your style together, but it has to be foundational in what other people have had success with, in my experience. So that's fun. And then connection. I just talked to a high school student. I was doing some mock interviewing for a friend with about 50 kids a couple weeks ago, and one of them took the initiative to follow up with me, and he said he was interested in car dealerships of all things, and so he's now connected with a friend of mine who runs car dealerships on the west side of the state, and so that might be a great mentor for him. But you have to, we're all walking in the shadow of these giants that have done it better than me, and so it's like if I just have to ask great questions and learn from them, and that's a everyday lifelong pursuit for sure.
Yeah, we have so much in common. Even from my distance chair that I had for years was just a wonderful, wonderful person. I learned so much. And, and I have the same feeling about my dad that you have about your dad and what he meant to me as an early mentor. And, as a young lawyer, I got the chance to work with him. And then he was nice enough to let his three sons just, borrow a conference room and start a business next door. And he didn't care if I quit the law practice. He was just happy his sons were going to work together. And to this day, he's my hero, going to be 98 years old, and I still learn from him every day. So I wish your dad was still around so you could experience that.
That's
Um,
amazing.
so let me just run these quick hit questions by you, Kevin, just as we do with everybody. Just very quickly, the first thing that comes to your mind, and we'll start with another leader that you look up to.
Yeah, easy to say you, right, Paul? Because I've known you for a number of years now. So without any pandering, I would say you. That's an easy one.
Oh wow, that's very humbling, but you could have chosen just about anybody else. But thank you. How about a great book that influenced your leadership style?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Cialdini's book Influence is an easy one to pick on. I just came across Predictable Success, right? It's probably been out there forever. I think it's McCowan for sure is the author's last name. That really helped me look at what age life cycle we're in right now and what's going on. And there's hundreds more. So if anybody
Mm,
listened, once,
that's a good one.
let me know.
Yeah. What about an all-time favorite movie?
Well, for me, Casablanca was always my favorite movie growing up, so I'll defer to that one. That's a hard question because I love movies, but Casablanca is phenomenal.
Yeah, I was with my son last night. We were going through our top 10, each of us. So we had some overlap, which is really good, even though we have a big age difference. All right. What's your favorite TV series to binge watch?
Oh, wow. You know what holds up really well? I'm watching Castle right now with our 15-year-old, and it does hold up really well. So I've been enjoying that immensely. And then Modern Family for me holds up really well is one that I love.
I love that show. Okay. Lastly, what is something about you that many people don't know?
I had pretty significant speech impediment when I was little. So I had to go through speech training, taken out of class for a long time, 3 years. And so that impacted a lot of different things, but most people don't know that and are surprised with how much I talk that I had a speech impediment.
You went the complete opposite directions when you figured that out. Well, Kevin, it's been just so great listening to you and being reminded of some of the special parts of your story. I want to reflect on some of the things I learned today. Uh, you're very fortunate too in the fact that what you guys do as a company is really very special, and I'm sure that the human-based stories of the people that you help and support through these government agencies is brings you guys tremendous pride. Uh, I know that it took that friend, that high school friend that told you that you live the values that you espouse, and that you caught on to something very early on in your life. You knew you loved working with people, not necessarily the traditional parts of being an entrepreneur. But you coined this servant leadership idea very early on before that word ever came about or people were even thinking about it. Put it on your business card 15 years ago. And your simple focus is the people that report to you. And in your case, you don't think you're not talking about the 10 people on your leadership team. You're talking about the 900 people that are part of the organization, and that you have found a way with your incredible assistant to scale a process to connect with those people every year, from 400 to 800, 900 people, small groups, individual meetings, and what that must mean to them to know that I'm going to have my time with Kevin, that half hour where we're just going to talk about how it's going. And he's open to hearing from me. He's listening. The fact that you take those ideas that you get, that you figure out where the company needs to improve or you need to improve, you implement those ideas. Just what better way to allow the company to grow? And no surprise that it's grown the way it has grown. And the key to freeing you up to do that work is to have an incredible leadership team. And that's exemplified by the loyalty you've created in that team. And this all came from how you grew up, the combination of a mom and dad who brought different things, your dad who had the courage to jump into being an entrepreneur, to have a mom who brought the compassion side to it and the people side, and working with your dad, learning from him all those years, realizing that you're being a servant of the people was something that started early on when you couldn't collect the paper route from people that couldn't afford it. And so it's okay, well, just as a straight entrepreneur, you're probably not going to make it. So you got to be in some sort of social enterprise. And you made your way into the business that you joined with your dad. And even though you had that desire to be a sportscaster, you got your teaching credential, did TV for a year, you got that opportunity with that steel contract to say to dad, like, hey, this is what I want to do. And you just haven't looked back. You got the opportunity when your dad was ready to leave to take it over and bought it, and you've just been growing it since. And I love the connection to the customer, how those customers can feel it. And people need to know that that's what drives that profitability of 17%, and that growth of 4% is because your focus on people comes across to the customer, and they stay loyal and they bring you more business, and that cycle simply continues. It's really pretty simple. I love the core values: show up, smile, and support. Very understandable for everyone, and something that you can repeat and talk about. But it's your consistent commitment to do these daily videos, to have these meetings that are, I think, what make the difference. And yet, with all that, there are challenges. Like as you said, and I experienced this as well, the expectations are really high when you have a great culture. And so you just listen a lot, you work on those things, you make sure that the pace of growth is monitored in a way that you don't sacrifice that culture, and things continue to move forward. And in your case, your improvement comes from, again, always being self-aware and making small changes. Say, could I listen more? Is there a better way to ask that question? Could be I be even more efficient with my time? And I love how you make decisions, right? It's like I read, I research, I pull together 10 or 12 people, I ask them all what they think, and then I make a decision. Like, what a wonderful, simple process to learn from people. And that same advice, which is find a mentor. And just like you're doing with high school students very early on, that's something that I naturally did from a pretty young age, is that I found people, whether it was my high school coaches or teachers, uh, or business people. I just seemed to be attracted to people that were much more successful than me. And I didn't hold back, even though I was always reserved and kind of an introvert, by asking those people to say, I'd love your help. And as you know, and I know, having been now in business for many years, we love to help. And we'll say yes to just pretty much anybody that asks, but sometimes it's hard to ask. And so if you can start early, gain those mentors, you're going to have that kind of impact on your life for your entire life and continue to grow. And just like you're seeking mentors today, I continue to do the same. And that really never ends. And that's all about courage to ask, and in my opinion, curiosity. So I think what you've accomplished so far, Kevin, is incredible. And there's so much more that you're going to give and impact you're going to have on the people you work with. So thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that generous summary too. If people were wondering if you were listening, that's amazing. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And thanks for listening to this episode of the Growing with Purpose podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts. To learn more about purpose driven leadership, go to smallgiants.org or follow us on social media. Until next time.